Crumbling stone whispers of kings and battles that built a continent. These are the lost fortresses of medieval Europe, the silent sentinels that literally drew the borders of the known world. By the end of this journey, you will understand how 21 vanished strongholds permanently shaped the political map we recognize today. How could a single castle's fall change the destiny of entire nations? And what hidden stories lie buried beneath these forgotten ruins? What forgotten corner of history captures your own imagination most deeply? A fortress on the frontier was a kingdom's unwavering stare into contested lands. Its stone walls declared not just defense but dominion. To truly grasp why the loss of these structures rewrote maps, we must see them as more than just castles. They were the very heartbeats of the borderlands. A mighty fortress served as a seat of local government, where a lord or his castellan would administer justice and collect taxes. It was a bustling economic engine, controlling vital trade routes and extracting tolls from merchants whose wagons carried silks, spices, and salt. For the surrounding communities, its walls offered a promise of safety, a place of last refuge when the smoke of invasion stained the horizon. The presence of such a stronghold could maintain a fragile peace for decades, its reputation alone deterring aggression. Yet that same presence could also be an unbearable provocation to a rival power, a constant challenge that demanded a response. This led to a relentless arms race in stone and timber. As siege engines grew more powerful, fortress designs adapted, with higher walls, deeper ditches, and complex gatehouses designed to thwart every new tactic. The rise of gunpowder would eventually render many of these designs obsolete, but that story comes later. For now, understand that each fortress was a living, breathing entity of control. Its fall was not merely a military defeat. It was the collapse of an entire system of power, commerce, and safety, an event that could erase a border and redraw the destiny of a people. This profound vulnerability leads us directly to our first and perhaps most pivotal lost fortress. Its very name, the Saucy Castle, was a declaration of defiance carved in stone. High on its chalk cliff above the Seine River, Château Gaillard was the personal masterpiece of England's warrior king, Richard the Lionheart. He poured his vast wealth and all the military genius he had gained from the Crusades into its creation, demanding its completion in just 2 years. The result was a fortress that seemed to mock its French rivals. Its revolutionary concentric walls, one set inside the other, created a deadly maze for any attacker. Its outer bailey was studded with rounded towers, a new design that deflected siege projectiles far better than old square keeps. This was not just a castle, it was the ultimate symbol of Angevin power, the solid heart of an empire that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. Yet this pride would precipitate its own stunning downfall. Just a few years after Richard's passing, the French King Philip Roman II set his sights on this arrogant stronghold. He knew that to break English power in Normandy, he had to break its saucy symbol. The siege that followed was a brutal contest of wills and ingenuity. The castle's revolutionary defenses were tested as never before. The final act was one of shocking audacity, where French soldiers allegedly found a secret way in through a seemingly inaccessible latrine chute. Whether through that famous breach or another, the fortress fell in March of 1204. The impact was immediate and profound. The loss of this supposedly unconquerable castle shattered English morale. Without its central bastion, the entire Norman defense crumbled. The Duchy of Normandy, a possession of the English crown for generations, was suddenly and irrevocably French. A border that had been fluid for centuries was now firmly drawn, setting the stage for centuries of conflict to come. Château Gaillard's capture was more than a military conquest. It was a transfer of power, a signal that the continental ambitions of the English kings were fading, while the centralized might of France was on the rise. This pattern of a single fortress defining the fate of a realm would echo again, far to the east, where another empire was cementing its own borders with stone and iron. Far to the east, where the Black Sea meets rugged mountains, the Empire of Trebizond endured as a final, shimmering fragment of Rome. For over 2 centuries after Constantinople itself had fallen, this isolated realm clung to its sovereignty, shielded by a chain of powerful fortresses. The greatest of these was the Citadel of Trebizond itself, a masterpiece of Byzantine engineering woven directly into the fabric of the coastal capital. Its walls did not just guard a city, they controlled a gateway. From this port flowed a river of wealth, the lucrative trade in silvers, spices, and silks that moved between Europe and Asia. The fortress was the lock on that gateway, its presence guaranteeing the empire's economic lifeblood and its unique identity at a cultural crossroads. Can you envision a city where Greek, Persian, and Venetian merchants all mingled under the watchful gaze of imperial guards? This was the vibrant world that the Citadel protected. But such a prize could not remain independent forever. The rising power of the Ottoman Turks, having taken Constantinople, now looked to secure its entire eastern flank. In the year 1461, the Sultan's massive army arrived at the gates. The fall of the citadel was not a dramatic siege, but a sober acknowledgement of a changed world. With its surrender, the very last remnant of the Roman Empire, a lineage stretching back to antiquity, was finally extinguished. The border between the Christian and Islamic worlds solidified here along this remote coastline. The assimilation of Trebizond into the Ottoman Empire closed a monumental chapter in human history. Its forgotten fortifications, now quiet ruins overlooking the sea, are a poignant testament to a brilliant, cosmopolitan world that simply faded from the map, its unique voice silenced by the relentless tide of conquest. This pattern of a fortress falling and a border hardening would be repeated again, not in the warm south, but in the cold, misty forests of the Baltic. Scattered across the sun-baked hills of southern Spain, the Alcazabas stood as more than mere castles. These Moorish fortresses were the very engines of a brilliant civilization, Al-Andalus. Within their formidable walls lay not just garrisons, but palaces, mosques, and public baths, all sustained by engineering marvels. Sophisticated hydraulics channeled water from distant mountains into lush gardens and cool fountains, creating oases of learning and power in an arid land. The Alcazaba of Almeria was a prime example, its walls guarding a bustling port city that served as a vital link in trade networks stretching from the Mediterranean deep into Africa. It was a world of scholars, poets, and merchants, all protected by the fortress's watchful presence. For centuries, these strongholds defined the frontier between the Islamic south and the Christian north. But the slow, grinding campaign known as the Reconquista began to push that frontier relentlessly southward. The fall of each Alcazaba was not just a military event, it was a cultural shift. As Christian kingdoms captured these citadels one by one, they repurposed them, building churches where mosques once stood and altering the skyline of power. The final act came with the surrender of Granada in 1492, an event that sealed the political map of a unified Spain. With each fortress that changed hands, the religious and political landscape was rewritten, erasing the old border of Al-Andalus and cementing a new order. The silent, weathered stones of these ruins today hold the complex story of a vanished world. a layered history of conflict and coexistence that permanently shaped the identity of a nation. This relentless push to define territory through fortification was not confined to the Mediterranean, however. Far to the north, in a very different landscape, another fortress was being built to secure a kingdom born from the sea. Into the deep, cold forests of the Baltic, the Teutonic Knights brought a new kind of fortress, built not from rough stone but from countless red bricks. Their great stronghold at Marienburg was more than a castle. It was a fortified monastery the size of a small city, its sheer walls and towering chapels a stark declaration of faith and power in a land they sought to conquer. This was the administrative heart of a theocratic state, a place where the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoed alongside the monk's chant. From these brick citadels, the knights launched a relentless campaign, one that mixed military might with a drive to convert the local pagan tribes. Each new fortress they built solidified their control, acting as both a garrison and a center for colonization, drawing in settlers from Germany to farm the land under the Order's protection. For over 200 years, this network of strongholds defined the easternmost border of Latin Christendom, a line drawn in brick and blood against the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. But this hard-edged state, born from the fortress, would also meet its end on the battlefield. The clash at Grunwald in 1410 was a cataclysm. A combined Polish-Lithuanian army delivered a shattering blow to the Order's military might, breaking the aura of invincibility that their castles had projected. Though the knights held on for a time, their power was broken. Their vast territorial state, so carefully built and defended from these brick fortresses, was gradually absorbed into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The very network that had created their state could not save it once the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The story of the Teutonic strongholds is a powerful lesson in how stone and mortar can build an entire nation, and how the failure of a single army can cause that entire carefully constructed world to crumble from within. While the Teutonic Knights built their state from mighty citadels, a very different kind of defensive vision was taking shape in the west. King Alfred of Wessex faced an existential threat, a storm of Viking raids that had shattered lesser kingdoms. His response was not a single proud fortress, but something far more profound, a living network of defense known as the Buzz. These fortified towns were the nervous system of a kingdom fighting for its life. Strategically placed across the landscape of Wessex, no burh was more than a day's march from another. This meant that when Viking longships were sighted, the local militia, the feared, could rally to the nearest stronghold, and reinforcements could arrive before a siege could take hold. It was a system of mutual support, a web of protection that made the entire kingdom stronger than any one of its parts. A place like Wallingford was the perfect example. It was more than a military camp. It was a planned settlement with a grid of streets, a market, and a mint. People were encouraged to live and trade within its safety, creating thriving communities that were both economically vital and defensively secure. The Buzz did not just shield the land, they cultivated it, forging a defensible border that protected the very soul of Anglo-Saxon England. This brilliant network was stunningly effective. It halted the Viking advance in its tracks, forcing the great heathen army to seek easier targets elsewhere. More than just a military victory, the Buzz system laid the foundational geography for a unified English state. These towns became the administrative centers, the shire towns that would govern the country for centuries to come. Alfred's vision demonstrates how a plan for defense can, in fact, forge a nation itself, creating the very structures of community and governance that outlive the immediate threat. This concept of a defensive line, however, would be pushed to its absolute limit on another continent, where an emperor sought to build a wall not just across a kingdom, but across the known world itself. Perched high in the Syrian hills, the Crac des Chevaliers was a mountain made into a fortress. Its concentric walls and vast sloping ramparts represented the absolute peak of Crusader military engineering, a daunting physical statement of Latin Christian power in the heart of the Levant. For over a century, this colossal stronghold, held by the Knights Hospitaller, was the immovable shield of the Crusader states. It guarded the vital Homs Gap, a natural passageway between the Mediterranean coast and the interior deserts, controlling the flow of armies and trade. The fortress was a city unto itself, capable of sheltering a garrison of 2,000 men and withstanding sieges that would have broken lesser castles. Its sheer presence projected an image of unshakable permanence, a permanent European foothold in a contested land, yet that permanence was an illusion. The rise of the Mamluk Sultanate under a brilliant and ruthless leader, Sultan Baybars, signaled a change in the wind. Baybars understood that to reclaim the Holy Land, he had to shatter its strongest shield. The Siege of 1271 was a masterclass in psychological warfare as much as military might. After repeated assaults made little progress against the fortress's legendary defenses, the Sultan reportedly resorted to a cunning trick. A forged letter, supposedly from the Hospitaller's own commander, was smuggled into the castle, ordering the garrison to surrender. This deception broke the defenders' will, leading to the fortress's negotiated capitulation. The fall of the Crac des Chevaliers sent a shockwave through the remnants of Outremer. It was not just the loss of a castle, it was the collapse of a strategic linchpin. Without this bastion, the entire defensive network of the Crusader states unraveled. Within 2 decades, the last major Latin strongholds fell, and the 2-century-long era of the Crusader states faded into history. The border between East and West, so fiercely defended from this mighty fortress, was erased, re-establishing Muslim control over the region and closing a tumultuous chapter of conflict and cultural exchange. Long before the first Norman ship appeared on the horizon, the Irish landscape was already dotted with fortifications. Gaelic chieftains ruled from ancient ring forts, their earthen banks encircling family settlements, and from mysterious crannogs, artificial islands built in the center of lakes. But as the world grew more complex, so too did their defenses. They began to raise towers of stone, transforming prominent sites like the Rock of Dunamace into formidable strongholds. Perched high on a limestone outcrop, Dunamace was more than a fortress. It was a symbol of unyielding local authority, its ruins today a stark silhouette against the sky. These Gaelic castles were the seats of powerful dynasties, centers of patronage, law, and culture that operated entirely outside the control of the English crown. For centuries, they represented a world that governed itself, but this independence was a direct challenge to the expanding ambitions of the English monarchy. The Tudor period, in particular, saw a decisive shift. The English administration in Dublin launched a relentless campaign to finally and completely subdue the island. This was not just a war of armies, but a war against symbols. The strategy was systematic and devastating. Gaelic fortresses were targeted for capture or for a process known as slighting, where their walls were deliberately torn down or blown apart with gunpowder to render them useless for defense. Can you envision the deliberate destruction of such a place, the toppling of stones that had stood for generations? This was not merely a military necessity, it was a calculated act to break the spirit of a people. The fall of each castle, like the one at Dunamace which was left a shattered ruin, dismantled the very framework of Gaelic power. The local lords lost their seats of authority, their ability to rally resistance, and their control over the land. In its place, the English imposed a new, rigid administrative border radiating from Dublin, a line of control that sought to erase the old Gaelic order. The shattered stones of these fortresses became a physical map of a new, harsh political frontier. This imposed border created a deep and lasting division, a fracture in the island's identity that would shape its troubled history for centuries to follow. Yet even as one frontier was being brutally defined by conquest, another was being meticulously constructed far to the north, where a different kind of king sought to unify his own fractured realm through a monument of stone and ambition. While kings built castles to hold land, merchants built fortresses to guard gold. The Hanseatic League, a sprawling network of trading cities, secured its vast commercial empire not with armies, but with unique strongholds known as contours. These were not castles in the traditional sense, but heavily fortified trading posts, walled islands of German commerce planted in foreign ports. The contour in Novgorod, known as Peterhof, was a city within a city, a secure compound where German merchants lived by their own laws, stored their precious goods of fur and wax, and negotiated deals that reached across the continent. Similarly, the Brigand contour in Bergen was a long row of wooden warehouses, its very architecture designed for security and efficient trade, a bustling nerve center for the stockfish trade that fed much of Europe. These enclaves were the physical embodiment of economic power, their walls marking not a military frontier but a commercial border. Within these protected spaces, a delicate system of trust and credit flourished, binding merchants from London to Riga in a common enterprise. The League's power was not in its soldiers, but in its ability to grant or deny access to this lucrative network, effectively drawing the economic borders of Northern Europe. But what happens when the foundations of commerce begin to shift? The decline of the Hanseatic League was a slow unraveling. New sea routes discovered by Portuguese and Dutch explorers bypassed their old Baltic monopolies. More importantly, the rising power of sovereign nation-states like England and Sweden began to challenge the League's special privileges. These new kingdoms wanted to control their own trade, collect their own taxes, and would no longer tolerate a foreign enclave operating as a state within their state. One by one, the contours lost their legal autonomy and their economic influence waned. The walls still stood, but the trust and the trade that gave them meaning had evaporated. The fall of these merchant fortresses demonstrates a profound truth, that some of the most important borders are invisible, drawn by ledgers and contracts. When those agreements collapsed, an entire economic world map was redrawn, proving that a fortress built on commerce can be just as vulnerable as one made of stone when the tides of history turn against it. This erosion of a commercial empire finds a stark parallel in the fate of a fortress that was never meant to fall, a symbol of royal power that became a monument to revolutionary change. The true borders of the Crown of Aragon were not lines on a map, but the sea lanes connecting a scattered empire. From the bustling port of Naples to the rocky shores of Sicily and Greece, their power was projected not by marching armies, but by the formidable castles that watched over every vital harbor. The Castel dell'Ovo in Naples, seemingly growing from the very sea it guarded, was the archetype of this maritime dominion. Its strength did not come from controlling vast farmlands, but from commanding the flow of ships, trade, and soldiers across the Mediterranean. This was a thalassocracy, an empire of the waves, where a single fortified port could hold more strategic value than an entire inland province. Can you picture the network these castles formed? A chain of sentinels where the signal fires of one could be seen by the next, creating a web of communication and control that stretched for hundreds of miles. Each fortress was a foothold, a secure base from which Aragonese galleys could patrol, tax merchant vessels, and launch further conquests, effectively drawing the empire's fluid, ever-shifting borders on the water itself. Yet an empire built on the sea is perpetually at the mercy of changing tides. As the crown of Aragon was gradually absorbed into the unified Kingdom of Spain, and as local Italian states grew in strength, the strategic purpose of these coastal bastions began to fade. The sea lanes they once protected were now part of a broader Spanish domain, and their role as the exclusive outposts of a specific imperial power became obsolete. They did not crumble into forgotten ruins, however. Instead, they were repurposed, becoming prisons, barracks, or simply magnificent landmarks, their original intent slowly fading from memory. Today, they stand as breathtaking monuments to a unique moment in history, a time when the most important frontiers were not marked by walls on land, but by the reach of a galley fleet and the watchful gaze of a castle built upon the shore. This concept of a frontier defined by the sea finds a powerful and tragic counterpart in the story of a fortress that guarded not an empire, but the very soul of a nation. Sometimes the most formidable fortress has no walls of stone. In the rolling hills of 15th-century Bohemia, a religious revolution found its defense not in a castle, but in a circle of farm wagons. The Hussite rebels, defying the immense authority of the Catholic Church, faced the full might of imperial crusades. Their answer was a breathtaking innovation in warfare, the Wagenburg, or fortified wagon camp. These were not permanent structures, but mobile strongholds created in hours. At the sight of the enemy, the Hussites would form a defensive logger, chaining their specially reinforced wagons together into a continuous wall. The gaps between wheels were filled with wooden shields, creating a makeshift rampart from which their soldiers could fight. This was a border you could pick up and move, a defiant line drawn anywhere on the map to protect the heart of their reformation. Inside this mobile fortress, a new kind of army operated. Peasant soldiers armed with early handguns and fearsome flails worked in concert with crossbowmen and artillery pieces mounted on the wagons themselves. Their tactics were a symphony of defense and sudden, brutal counterattack. They would weather the initial charge of armored knights whose horses would falter before the wagon wall, and then, at the perfect moment, burst forth from hidden gates to overwhelm the disorganized foe. This mobile fortress system allowed the Hussites, time and again, to defeat far larger and better equipped armies sent to destroy them. For 2 decades, these wagon camps created a moving, protected territory, a space where their religious ideals could exist free from imperial control. The border they defended was not one of land, but of belief. Their eventual compromise with the Church, the Compacts of Basel, did not involve the physical slighting of a castle. Instead, it was the dissolution of a revolutionary idea, a negotiated end to a military and spiritual standoff. The story of the Hussite Wagenburg teaches us that the most resilient borders are not always made of mortar and rock. They can be drawn from conviction and ingenuity, proving that a line in the dust defended by the willing can hold back empires. In the misty valleys of Wales, a new kind of frontier was being carved not just into the land, but into the very identity of a people. King Edward I of England, known for his formidable will, faced a challenge that mountains and guerrilla warfare presented. His solution was the Iron Ring, a chain of fortresses so advanced and so strategically placed that they were designed to choke the life from Welsh independence. These were not mere garrison posts, they were colossal statements of power. At Conwy, the castle's 8 great towers rise from the bedrock, its walls fused with the town defences to create a single, impregnable English island on the Welsh coast. At Caernarfon, the imposing polygonal towers and bands of coloured stone were a deliberate echo of the mighty walls of Constantinople, a symbolic claim to imperial authority meant to dwarf the local princes' halls. Each castle was planted with surgical precision on the sites of ancient Welsh power, often using the labor of the conquered to build the very structures that would ensure their subjugation. Can you sense the profound psychological impact of such a construction, watching a foreign king's unassailable stone crown being placed upon the heart of your homeland? The Iron Ring did not just draw a military line, it systematically dismantled the old political map. It controlled the coastal routes and river valleys that were the arteries of trade and communication, rendering large-scale rebellion logistically impossible. The final, independent Principality of Wales was effectively extinguished, its territory absorbed into the English realm under a new administrative border enforced from these stone citadels. The legacy of Edward's castles is therefore deeply complex. They are marvels of medieval engineering, yes, but they are also permanent monuments to a conquest so total that it used architecture as its final, unanswerable argument. They stand today not only as tourist attractions but as a silent, sobering lesson in how stone and mortar can be used to redraw the destiny of a nation, leaving a border that has endured for more than 7 centuries. Yet the stone rings of conquest could also give way to the delicate architecture of a courtly dream. In the fertile, low-lying lands of the Netherlands and Belgium, the Dukes of Burgundy assembled a realm not through brute force alone, but through brilliant political marriages and a network of spectacular strongholds. Their castles, like the imposing Gravenstein in the city of Ghent, served a dual purpose. They were formidable military garrisons, yes, but they were also the glittering stages for one of Europe's most lavish courts. Within these walls, the dukes cultivated an atmosphere of immense wealth and cultural sophistication, their patronage attracting the finest artists, musicians, and thinkers of the age. This carefully constructed world of tapestries and tournaments was the glue that bound their scattered territories together, a collection of powerful cities and provinces that sat directly atop the ancient, fuzzy border between the French kingdom and the Holy Roman Empire. The Burgundian state itself became that border, a wealthy, independent buffer zone defined by the presence of its fortresses and the power of its court. But what happens when a magnificent structure loses its central pillar? The entire edifice can collapse in an instant. That moment came with the sudden death of Duke Charles the Bold on a frozen battlefield in 1477. He left no male heir, and his meticulously assembled inheritance instantly became the most coveted prize on the continent. The great fortresses that had once symbolized Burgundian unity were suddenly rendered leaderless. They became mere pieces on a grand strategic board, fought over by the King of France and the rising House of Habsburg, which claimed the lands through marriage. This was not just a war for castles, but for the very soul of Western Europe. The eventual Habsburg victory tore the old Burgundian lands in two. The southern territories, including the original duchy, were absorbed into France, while the rich northern provinces of the Netherlands passed to the Habsburgs. This division, literally drawn through the ownership of these former Burgundian strongholds, created a new and volatile frontier. It planted the seeds for generations of conflict, pitting a powerful France against a sprawling Habsburg Empire, a rivalry that would define European politics and warfare for centuries to come. The silent stones of a place like the Gravenstein thus hold the echo of a lost kingdom, a reminder of how the fate of a single dynasty can shatter one world and violently birth another. For over 700 years, the Byzantine Empire did not merely defend its borders, it wove them into the very fabric of its society through a revolutionary system known as the themas. Each thema was a self-sufficient military district, a world in itself, anchored by a powerful fortified city. These urban strongholds, like the great city of Amorium in the heart of Anatolia, were far more than garrisons. They were thriving centers of administration, culture, and agriculture. their walls protecting the farmers whose crops fed the empire and the artisans whose goods traveled its trade routes. The entire defensive strategy of Byzantium rested on this network. When an Arab or Bulgar army crossed the frontier, the local Thema forces, the farmer soldiers, would rally to their fortress city, holding the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive from neighboring districts. It was a living, breathing border, resilient and deeply rooted. Can you see how this system turned the entire landscape into a shield? The fortress was not an isolated outpost. It was the heart of the community, and the community was the heart of the empire's defense. This brilliant structure held the line for centuries, preserving Roman law and Greek culture against relentless pressure. But the strength of such a system is also its greatest vulnerability, for if the heart is pierced, the entire body weakens. That fatal blow landed at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. The catastrophic defeat of the imperial army and the capture of the emperor did not just lose a single battle, it shattered the central authority that coordinated the Themas. With a chain of command broken, the fortified cities were left isolated like islands in a rising tide. One by one, the great urban fortresses of Anatolia, the empire's agricultural and human heartland, were overwhelmed or surrendered. Each fallen city was not just a lost stronghold, it was a lost province, a lost source of soldiers and food and taxes. The border, once drawn deep in Anatolia, began a relentless, centuries-long retreat back towards the walls of Constantinople itself. The erosion of the Themas was the erosion of the empire's lifeblood, a slow exhalation that left the magnificent capital a head without a body, destined to endure for centuries more, but never to recover its former strength. This story of a defensive system unraveling finds a stark and sudden contrast in the fate of a single, legendary fortress that stood alone against the tide, a place whose very name means strength. The border between England and Scotland was not a line on a map but a state of mind, a permanent condition of alertness. Here, in the lawless lands known as the Marches, the true rulers were not distant kings but the raiding families on both sides, the reivers. Their world was defined by a unique and rugged fortress, the Peel Tower. These were not the grand castles of monarchs but stark, practical towers of stone, often just 3 or 4 stories high, built by a single family for a single purpose, survival. A typical Peel Tower was a world unto itself, its ground floor a stable for livestock, the main living area above, and a watchtower at the very top from which a sentinel could spot the dust of an approaching raid. What kind of life is it when your home must also be your citadel, when the safety of your family and your cattle depends entirely on the thickness of your own walls and the sharpness of your own weapons? This was the reality of the borders for generations. The constant cycle of raid and counter-raid, known as reiving, created a culture where loyalty to your surname and your immediate kin mattered far more than any abstract allegiance to London or Edinburgh. Official peace treaties between the two crowns meant little in these valleys, where a stolen herd of cattle was the true currency of power. The border these families defined was a fluid, brutal frontier of clan allegiance, a de facto zone of control that ebbed and flowed with the success of each night raid. The eventual pacification of this wild territory was a slow, deliberate process undertaken by the central governments of both nations. As royal authority finally stretched its long arm into the marches, the old ways of the reivers were systematically dismantled. The Peel Towers, symbols of fierce local independence, lost their reason for being. Some were abandoned to the elements, their stones slowly reclaimed by the wind-swept hills. Others were transformed into more peaceful manor houses, their battlements softened by time. The end of the reiving way of life was the final act in drawing a true, enforceable national frontier. The law of the surname gave way to the law of the state, closing a tumultuous chapter where the most important border was the one you could defend from your own doorstep with a sword in your hand. From the lawless hills of the Scottish border to the vast, open steppe, the nature of a frontier was defined by the power that held it. The Mongols of the Golden Horde ruled the largest land empire in history, a domain stretching from the Danube to Siberia. Their strength was the horse and the bow, a force built for breathtaking mobility across endless grasslands. Yet to control the conquered Russian principalities, they too needed fixed points of power. They established garrison towns and outposts, with Sarai on the Volga River becoming their magnificent capital. This was not a fortress in the European sense, with towering stone keeps, but a sprawling administrative center of palaces, mosques, and bustling markets. Sarai was the nerve center of an empire, the place where tribute from Russian princes was collected and where the decrees of the Khans were issued. Its presence on the horizon was a constant physical reminder of who held ultimate authority. Can you conceive of the psychological weight such a place carried for the subjugated local rulers, a journey they were compelled to make regularly to reaffirm their loyalty? This was how the Mongols drew their border, not with a wall, but with the unanswerable power concentrated in these strategic towns. But an empire built on tribute and terror contains the seeds of its own dissolution. The gradual breakup of the Golden Horde into competing khanates shattered that centralized power. As the Mongols fought among themselves, their grip on the frontier outposts loosened. In the west, the princes of Muscovy, once junior tribute payers, began to gather their strength. They slowly stopped their payments and started to push the boundary of their own influence eastward, reclaiming land that had been under Mongol dominance for generations. The fall of these Mongol outposts was not a dramatic siege, but a quiet fading. Without the unifying force of the Golden Horde, the garrisons lost their purpose and their power simply evaporated. The border of the steppe empire receded mile by mile as the new border of a rising Russian state advanced to take its place. This slow, seismic shift in power redrew the map of Eastern Europe, ending one epoch of domination and beginning another. A republic of merchants built its empire not on land but on the sea, and its borders were guarded by stone islands. The Venetian Château d'Armor, or sea state, was a constellation of fortresses stretching from the lagoon's mouth to the distant shores of Cyprus. Each fortified port from Corfu to Candia was a link in an unbreakable chain securing the wealth of the Mediterranean. The massive walls of Famagusta on Cyprus were the ultimate expression of this power, a daunting circuit of angled bastions designed to withstand the terrifying new force of Ottoman cannon fire. Within its secure harbor, Venetian galleys loaded with silks, spices, and sugar could rest and resupply, their safe passage guaranteed by the fortress's unwavering presence. This was how Venice drew its map, not with lines on parchment, but with a network of secure harbors that channeled the lifeblood of trade directly back to the Rialto. For centuries, this system turned the Republic into one of the wealthiest and most influential states in the world. But a rival power was rising in the east, one equally determined to control these same waters. The Ottoman Empire began a relentless, century-long pressure campaign, testing every link in the Venetian chain. The epic Siege of Famagusta in 1570 became the dramatic, brutal climax of this struggle. The fortress held out for nearly a year under a horrific bombardment, a testament to its revolutionary design and the defenders' resolve. Yet even the strongest walls can be broken by overwhelming force and dwindling hope. The eventual fall of Famagusta, and with it the island of Cyprus, sent a seismic shock through Europe. For Venice, it was more than a military defeat. It was a catastrophic economic and strategic contraction. The loss of each overseas fortress meant the loss of a trading post, a naval base, and a source of revenue. The Republic's maritime border, once lapping at the shores of the Levant, was now pushed relentlessly back toward the Adriatic. The strength of its distant stone sentinels had been the true measure of its power, and as they fell one by one, that power visibly receded, a slow but unmistakable ebbing of a once great commercial empire. Charlemagne's empire was a colossal achievement, a fragile resurrection of Roman glory in the West. To shield this vast domain, he did not build a single wall, but an entire defensive philosophy carved into the landscape itself. These were the marches, fortified border zones entrusted to his most loyal counts. Each march was a world of its own, a bristling frontier where the count's authority was absolute, his word backed by the stone strongholds that watched over the wild land. In the sun-scorched south, the Spanish march stood firm against the power of the Umayyad Caliphate, its castles a hard line between the cross and the crescent. To the north, the Danish march faced the endless threat of Viking fleets, its fortresses guarding the riverways that led into the empire's heart. And far to the east, the Eastern March was a bulwark against the steppe confederations like the Avars, a place where the rhythms of Frankish life met the vast unknown. These marches were more than just military districts. They were the very definition of the Carolingian world, the outermost edge of what was considered Christendom. Their existence drew a spiritual and political border on the map, a line secured by the loyalty of a count and the strength of his garrison. But what happens when the center cannot hold? After Charlemagne's passing, the imperial unity he forged began to fracture under the rivalries of his grandchildren. The very system designed to protect the empire now accelerated its division. The counts of the marches, once the empire's shield, found their loyalties pulled in new directions as power fragmented. The Spanish march would slowly evolve into the independent county of Barcelona, a cornerstone of what would become Catalonia. The Eastern March, known as Ostmark, became the nucleus of a new power, Austria, and the lands between, once unified under Charlemagne, hardened into the separate spheres of influence that would one day be France and Germany. The story of the Carolingian marches is a profound lesson in how the tools of defense can outlive the unity they were meant to protect. The fortresses are long gone, but the borders they first established on the very fringe of an empire went on to become the enduring heart of modern Europe. While the Carolingian marches defined the old borders of empire, a new breed of conquerors was forging a kingdom from chaos in the sun-drenched south. Norman adventurers, descendants of Vikings who had settled in northern France, arrived in Italy as mercenaries and saw an opportunity for a crown of their own. Through relentless ambition and martial skill, they stitched together a realm from the fractured lands of southern Italy and Sicily. To secure their hard-won prize, they raised a network of formidable castles, with the fortress of Melfi standing as their first and most symbolic capital. These were not just military outposts, but the very engines of a new state. From Melfi's great halls, the Norman kings issued their groundbreaking legal codes, administering justice to a remarkably diverse population. Can you hear the echoes of different tongues within those stone walls, the Latin of the Church, the Greek of Byzantine officials, the Arabic of Muslim scholars, and the French of the new Norman lords? This was a truly multicultural kingdom, and the castle was the stage upon which this complex society was managed and unified. The Normans were practical masters of power, often building their own strongholds directly atop the foundations of older Byzantine or Lombard forts, physically layering their new authority over the old. This strategic inheritance gave them instant control over the most defensible points in the landscape. The political destiny of the entire Mezzogiorno, this southern region of Italy, would be decided from these Norman fortresses for centuries. Even after the direct Norman line ended, their castles endured. The great Hohenstaufen Emperor Frederick II, a figure of immense intellect and power, made these very fortresses the backbone of his own administration. He understood their value not just for defense, but as centers of bureaucracy and control. The enduring presence of these structures meant that southern Italy, rich and strategically vital, remained a prize perpetually contested. Papal ambitions, imperial dreams, and royal claims from across the Alps all clashed over this land, with the ownership of its Norman castles often signifying who held true power. The stones of Melfi and its sister fortresses thus witnessed a continuous parade of flags and rulers, their enduring strength a testament to the Norman genius for building kingdoms that long outlasted their own dynasty. Far to the north, where the Baltic Sea meets a land of deep forests and frozen shores, the Livonian Order raised fortresses of stark grey stone. As a branch of the Teutonic Knights, their mission was the same, to conquer and convert, but their theater was the rugged coastline of what is now Latvia and Estonia. Their great castle at Cesis was the embodiment of this northern crusade, a sprawling complex of towers and walls designed to dominate the landscape and subjugate the local Baltic tribes. Its presence was a declaration marking the absolute northeastern frontier of Catholic Christendom, a spiritual border as much as a military one. Beyond these walls lay the domain of the Russian Orthodox Principality of Novgorod, making every stone of Cesis a bulwark in a cold war of faith and territory. For 3 centuries, these castles held the line, but the foundation of their power was about to fracture. The Livonian War of the 16th century was a catastrophic storm that the Order could not weather. As their political and military structure dissolved, the entire region transformed from a controlled borderland into a vast, contested vacuum. The great stone castles did not crumble into obscurity. Instead, they became the most coveted prizes in a new struggle. Can you see the banners changing over the battlements of Cesis? The yellow and blue of Sweden, the white eagle of Poland, and eventually the double-headed eagle of Russia. Each new flag flying from the towers represented a violent shift in the political map. The very stones of these fortresses became a physical ledger, their successive owners meticulously recording the slow, grinding expansion of Russian influence westward. The loss of the Livonian Order's state erased one world and created a new, volatile frontier that would define Northern European power dynamics for centuries, proving once again that a fallen fortress does not simply vanish. It becomes the foundation upon which new empires are built. The ocean was the only road home for the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem. Its survival was measured by the tides that brought supply ships and fresh knights from Europe, and its coastal fortresses were the guardians of that fragile lifeline. Massive strongholds like Atlit and Arsuf rose from the shoreline, their walls plunging directly into the Mediterranean. These were not just castles, they were fortified ports, controlling the vital flow of goods, money, and soldiers that sustained the Frankish presence in a hostile land. Within their protected harbors, ships unloaded the tools of war and the luxuries of a European aristocracy, trying to recreate its world far from home. Without these coastal anchors, the inland cities like Jerusalem itself would have been isolated, starved of resources, and utterly indefensible. The strategic genius of leaders like Saladin was his clear understanding of this reality. His campaigns were not just aimed at winning battles on land, but at systematically severing this maritime tether. The capture of a single coastal fortress was a devastating blow, but the methodical conquest of these strongholds by Saladin and later the Mamluk sultans was a slow, deliberate strangulation. Each fallen castle was like a link in a chain being snapped, one after another. The kingdom, once connected to the wider world by a vibrant sea lane, was gradually pushed back, isolated, and cut off. The final loss of the great port of Acre in 1291 was merely the last gasp of a patient that had been dying for years. The fate of the Crusader states offers a timeless lesson in warfare, that the most formidable army is useless if it cannot be supplied. The borders of a kingdom can be drawn in the sand, but they are only as strong as the sea roads that lead to its shores. This principle of controlling the lines of communication would be tested again on a much grander scale, where an entire civilization sought to build a wall across the very top of the world. High in the thin air of the Alpine passes, freedom was not declared with a document, but with a barricade. The founding cantons of the Swiss Confederacy secured their hard-won independence not by building towering castles, but by turning the mountains themselves into an unassailable fortress. They fortified the narrow, vital choke points like the St. Gothard Pass, where a single well-placed gatehouse and a determined garrison could control the flow of empires. This was the genius of their defense. They understood that the real power lay in controlling movement, in holding the keys to the shortest route for merchants moving silks from Italy to the markets of the north, and for the armies of Habsburg dukes who sought to reclaim their lost subjects. How does a loose collection of peasant communities defy one of Europe's most powerful dynasties? They stand shoulder to shoulder in a narrow defile where numbers mean nothing and courage means everything. The successful defense of these natural fortifications allowed the Confederacy to grow from a fragile pact into a resilient political entity, a permanent anomaly in the heart of a continent increasingly dominated by kings and emperors. This was a border defined by geography and defended by collective will, a living proof that the most durable frontier of all is not a line on a map, but a shared commitment to hold the high ground. From the sheer cliffs of Château Gaillard to the remote passes of the Swiss Alps, these 21 lost fortresses were more than just stone and mortar. They were the very instruments with which medieval Europe was carved into kingdoms, empires, and nations. Each stone laid was a political statement, each fallen wall a shift in the continent's destiny. Their stories of construction, siege, and eventual abandonment are not merely tales of military engineering. They are the deeper narratives of shifting power, of cultural clash, and of the relentless human drive to define identity through the control of territory. Can you feel the weight of those decisions in the scattered ruins that remain? While their walls have crumbled and their banners have long since faded, the borders they fought so hard to establish have proven astonishingly durable, shaping the political map of the continent we recognize today. We would love to hear which of these forgotten strongholds captured your imagination the most. Was it the saucy defiance of Château Gaillard, the mobile defiance of the Hussite wagon forts, or the maritime might of Venetian Famagusta? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more explorations into the hidden corners of history. Remember, the past is not just a story in a book. It is written in the landscape all around us, waiting for those who know how to look. The quiet fields and rolling hills of Europe still hold the faint, enduring scars of these vanished strongholds. For the modern explorer, finding them is a kind of historical detective work, a way to walk directly in the footsteps of a distant past. Often, the grand stone walls are long gone, leaving only subtle hints for those who know how to look. What appears as a simple, tree-covered mound in a farmer's field might be the remains of a motte, the raised earthwork that once supported a wooden tower. The gentle depressions and ridges surrounding it could be the ghost of a defensive ditch or bailey, a layout visible only from the air or to a patient eye on the ground. These unassuming earthworks are the skeletons of castles, their stories written not in stone but in the very shape of the land. The journey of discovery continues with the names on the map. Local place names are often the most reliable guide, preserving a memory long after the last stone has been carted away for a farmhouse wall. A village ending in burg, castle, or fort almost certainly marks the spot where a fortress once stood, its name a permanent whisper of its former importance. The modern tools of exploration are as vital as a keen eye. Older state maps and archaeological surveys can pinpoint the exact location of a forgotten keep, while satellite imagery sometimes reveals the geometric ghost of foundations beneath a plowed field or a quiet meadow. This process of uncovering the past is more than an academic exercise. It is a personal connection to the knights, lords, and common folk whose lives were defined by these walls. To stand on the grassy mound where a wooden tower once creaked in the wind, or to trace the outline of a crumbled curtain wall with your own feet, is to feel the weight of history in a profoundly tangible way. A simple country walk can become a direct encounter with the forces of power, conflict, and community that literally drew the map of the continent, ensuring the legacy of these lost fortresses remains alive for generations to